assailant from New York sent to Gitmo?
Thank you, Major.
Mr. President,
I would certainly consider that, yes.
Are you considering that now?
I would certainly consider that. Send him to Gitmo. I would certainly consider that.
So the terror attack in New York has flared up the debate over whether these suspects ought to be treated as enemy combatants instead of domestic criminals. Now, federal terror charges have just been filed, though, so at least for now, it will be tried in civilian courts. The charges are providing support to ISIS and violence and destruction of motor vehicles. Now, you just heard how the president feels. Here's Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina Republican.
Every time we've had a terrorist attack with somebody like this, I've been saying the same thing. Hold them as an unlawful enemy combatant to gather intelligence. Don't read them their Miranda rights. It's not too soon. We should have done this years ago. Slowly but surely over time, we've taken the war and turned it into a crime.
Now, his good friend and fellow Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona agrees as well. Enemy combatant designations has some pretty big legal implications. Suspect would be questioned without an attorney present. He could be imprisoned indefinitely. We've seen that. And he could have habeas corpus rights suspended, meaning he couldn't challenge that indefinite detention. Let's bring in our legal panel right now to help us sort this out and so much more. Mimi Roca is the new Distinguished Fellow in Criminal Justice at Pace University Law School. Until recently, she was Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, a position she held for more than 15 years. Distinguished gentleman, keep that in mind. Doug Van Oyst, a focusing partner of Carson Van Oyst, focusing on corporate misconduct, also selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayor Bartlett, PLC, and a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office, and Mark Furnish, adjunct professor at the
Undistinguished.
I was going to say that, thank you, of the Elizabeth House School of Law at Pace, and he's argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. Thank you for stealing my line. Okay.
We're sharing a brain, Rich.
Yes, we are. So here is my question. Let's just say the five of us agree without any debate. Horrible guy, throw the book at him, farthest limits of the law. From a practical standpoint, though, maybe I'll start with you. Whenever we've tried these guys in civilian court, more than 99% of the time, they get the longest punishment possible. When we send them to Gitmo, they're in a netherworld, and at times, they're then released here because of all questions about lack of due process. So this has nothing to do with whether somebody needs a suture for a bleeding heart or their right wing. From a practical standpoint, if we want, beyond any question as to proper handling of a case and the longest sentence attached, wouldn't a civilian court be the place to go?
I think so. I couldn't agree more. And I think what just happened is the perfect example of that. Within 24 hours, just over 24 hours, this man who committed unspeakable acts yesterday has been charged in a federal court. And the idea that if we read him his Miranda rights, the case isn't going to be able to proceed quickly enough or as good, clearly isn't right, because this guy is talking. Half of the complaint, I haven't actually gotten to read it, but what I heard from the news conference when the U.S. Attorney's Office announced it, the complaint is based in large part on this man's own admissions since he was caught and apprehended and is in the hospital and speaking. So, and I'm positive, without even having to ask anyone, that he was Mirandized.
And reportedly is also a person of interest, not necessarily a suspect, that they've also gleaned from some of these same conversations. Well, Doug, is there a bright line where I think people would say, wait a second, if you get some guy on a battlefield in Afghanistan, that's one thing, versus maybe if this happened in lower Manhattan. But, you know, he's got a green card, not a full U.S. citizen. Are there shades of gray here, or is it in the best interest of anyone, including those who want the harshest punishment attached to them, that we try him in a civilian court or not?
Well, of course there are shades of gray. You've hit on the distinction. When a person is a U.S. citizenship or has status here, when you talk about taking away their rights, you're talking about depriving them of their constitutional rights, and that steps into a whole different thing. When you see an incident like this where the person is clearly caught on film doing this, that's one thing. But if you had a person that was more attenuated to the act, who's perhaps a family member or something like that, and you wanted to treat them like you want to treat him and take him away and deprive him of his constitutional rights, that would be a completely different scenario.
So, Mark, you heard the president, and he's not alone in saying hey, send them to Cuba, basically stick them in a dark box here, don't give them counsel and whatever else. That's in the best interest of America. Is that going too far? Do you know where that starts and stops?
I don't think it's going far enough, and I take a totally different view of this than any view that's been espoused by anyone. I don't think this is a legal problem. I think it's a national security and a military problem. I don't really care what happens to this man in terms of retribution other than using him as a potential source of intelligence. My goal is to deter this from happening again to the extent possible. It's never going to be fail-safe. To that end, I would emulate the Israeli model. There is a way to do this to minimize this from happening again. They know where his relatives are. They know where his people are. I would go to their homes and I would raze them to the ground like the Israelis do after each and every one of these attacks. And maybe, just maybe, this will cause them and their families to think twice about doing this again.
I've spoken to folks in the intelligence community who took a far different view, including those who were agents in charge at Ground Zero, which was waterboarding had the adverse effect, and Gitmo, from a recruiting standpoint, hasn't. Rather than maybe from the legal perspective getting into this, Doug, the president even went further today. Not just about where possibly to go, because that was in response to a question, or even changing immigration policies, which people can have a debate about. He made a statement about the entire justice system. I want you to take a listen to this, and I want to get your reaction.
We need quick justice, and we need strong justice. Much quicker and much stronger than we have right now. Because what we have right now is a joke, and it's a laughingstock.
Okay, I want to get to the joke that our justice system is a laughingstock, but we have a bunch of people with this who've defended people. So when you hear somebody saying a quick one and a stronger one, I have no idea what the hell that means, but more importantly, due process, do away with it. I don't know where that starts and stops either, but that our justice system is a joke and a laughingstock. What's our Attorney General saying today?
Well, I think that it's interesting that that's coming from President Trump when he's under such scrutiny right now and possibly under investigation himself. There are a lot of people who'd love to see quick, swift, and strong justice with respect to him and his campaign.
Let's not compare the President of the United States to a terrorist, madman, Islamic
The other thing that I would
Let's
like to say is this. If you go back to what Mimi said, generally if you're a terrorist, you have a message that you want to get across. So you're going to talk. You're going to let people know. If you want to go someplace where they put you in a dark hole, go to North Korea. And you won't be seen. You won't have a fair trial. I don't think any of us are interested in that.
The civilian trials, they don't really get due process. And let me tell you something. Winston Churchill said the same thing in fancier language.
Go ahead.
Okay, and that's part of the issue too, is that if we talk past one another, then you know that's a good way also. I think at least to respect what the other person's attempting to say.
Well, you're comparing him to the terrorist madman who just mowed people down on the bike path.
I'm talking about a person who's the President of the United States, who just had a very close, associate indicted, and
not an Islamic
many people.
Terrorist, not a murderer.
But let's define the terms again so we don't go off the rails.
But let's not compare any president of the United States, Barack Obama, George Bush, to an Islamic terrorist. Let's not do that. Let's not do that.
Okay, well, let's also not do this. It's also not Mark Furnish Live, all right? Not yet, at least. So my point is this. The president, in a sweeping statement, said that our justice system is a joke and a laughingstock. Now, we're not a nation that started 2 days ago, okay? So the premise, Mimi, that there is due process, and we can have a debate as to the best way to handle this. There's no one answer. But that's a blanket statement over the whole system. And I got to think about people that practice law to condemn the entire system as a joke.
Richard, I heard that just before I came here, and I was deeply shocked and offended by it. And I think everybody, people on both sides of the aisles, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and law enforcement, the police officer who was out there who risked his life and stopped what would have been greater carnage, should take great offense to that. And I think what's most shocking about that statement is it's not surprisingly, it's not based in fact or reality. The Chelsea bomber committed horrible acts last September. In a year's time, so by October, he had been investigated, tried, convicted, and is now facing mandatory life in prison. That seems like a pretty good deterrent to me.
It didn't deter what happened yesterday.
Efficient system. Well, it deterred him from building a bomb, but of course, you're not going to prevent everything. from happening. You can't. Plenty of law enforcement officials have said that. But the president is ignoring a history of successful prosecutions in Article III courts. Yes, I'm going to brag about my former office, but you can tick them off. There have been dozens before September 11th and after, in which people have efficiently, quickly, and swiftly been brought to justice.
I think that's just the point. I think we pay lip service to the idea of giving these people due process at a trial, but the outcomes are almost always foreordained.
We don't give them due process. Then you don't expect it yourself. And you can't have a president who undermines a branch of government.
If you are going to give them due process, they should have the full panoply of rights at a civil trial, just like everybody else, and they get railroaded into convictions.
Let's say even grant that. I don't agree with that, but let's say I even grant that.
They don't get the due process rights that I would get. They don't.
But here's the point. We do send a message that we don't just take somebody we don't like what they said or did or whatever.
It's a show trial.
And we stick.
That's what it is.
But at the end,
just like Churchill said about Nuremberg,
in the end,
Donald Trump didn't just make this up.
Richard, do you apply the same thing to the alt-right? Do you apply the exact same?
No, because the alt-right isn't committed to annihilating the United States of America.
Please, let's not go into
their ideology. Their ideology is committed to annihilating the United States of America.
That's coming up next. The Russia probe. I'm sure we'll enjoy getting into that one. This is getting overshadowed by news obviously coming out of the tragedy yesterday, but the investigation is also heating up. 2 indictments, 1 guilty plea. We'll take a look at what's next, straight ahead.
Are you discreet, Mr. Donovan? Whatever the fee is, I'll pay it.
That's a $3 billion problem. I'll see what I can do.
Your 19-year-old daughter called the police.
What'd you do?
Your brother and your father were hospitalized.
I told you. I'll take care of it.
Watch new episodes of Ray Donovan, Sundays at 9 on Showtime and Showtime Anytime. Catch up anytime on Showtime On Demand.
Mommy, I miss Skippy. I didn't get to say goodnight to him.
Long Island Veterinary Specialists. Open 24 hours a day. Ready to help your pet when you need us most. Long Island Veterinary Specialists. Where you take your pet first makes all the difference.
What would a statewide constitutional convention look like? Like the bar in Star Wars. Corrupt politicians there to grab more power and more of our money. New York City's special interest there to grab even more of our region's tax dollars. And extremist groups there to pass extreme agendas that'll take away our rights and raise our taxes. And the cost of a constitutional convention? Hundreds of millions.
We have code on a laptop that we can then download onto the brain of the robot here.
Today in school, I don't think I will use a computer at all.
Our hopes for the future are very technology dependent.
We grew up living poor. We want to see what it's like to have a chance.
Watch Without a Net, The Digital Divide in America, Saturday, November 4th at 12 noon on FiOS One News, only on Verizon.
A big week for the Russia probe. Nobody, except the White House, can maybe argue that this week was a huge deal when it came to Bob Mueller. So far, we have 2 indictments and we have a guilty plea. We learned of all 3 on Monday. In case you missed it, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort under house arrest as we speak. That as he awaits his next court appearance. Manafort and associate Rick Gates facing a dozen federal charges, including conspiracy, money laundering, as much as $20 million, and acting as an unregistered foreign agent. Also, it was revealed in court that Manafort has 3 passports, each under a different name. He's also submitted 10 passport applications over the past decade. This man, George Papadopoulos, he is the guilty plea, and he's also been cooperating with the government, get this, since July. Papadopoulos admitted to lying to the FBI about his contact with